Cybercriminals are using social engineering loaded with urgency and fear to successfully prey on victims, your employees, or your customers. Protect your Office 365 email from today's most sophisticated attacks with Barracuda Email Threat Scanner. It's a free tool to help protect your business from these hard-to-detect attacks. The Barracuda Email Threat Scanner uses artificial intelligence to hunt and eliminate Office 365 email threats. Find the cybersecurity threats hiding in your Office 365 email right now. Get your free email threat scan at securityweekly.com/Barracuda. We're proud to announce CISO Stories, a new podcast series in partnership with Cybersecurity Collaborative and Cyber Reason. CISO Stories features the candid perspectives and experiences of frontline senior security executives and dives deep into timely security topics. CISO Stories is hosted by Todd Fitzgerald, VP of Cybersecurity Strategy at Cybersecurity Collaborative, and Sam Curry, Chief Product and Security Officer at Cyber Reason. Listen weekly as they speak with extraordinary CISOs by visiting securityweekly.com/CSP.
Welcome back to Business Security Weekly. I am your host, Matt Alderman, joined by Paul Asadorian and Adrian Sanabria. Security Weekly listeners save $100 on their RSA Conference 2021 All Access Pass. RSA Conference will be a fully virtual experience from May 17th to May 20th. Security Weekly will be live streaming Monday through Thursday in virtual broadcast alley, interviewing some of the top sponsors and speakers for the event. To register using our discount code, please visit securityweekly.com/RSAC2021 and use the discount code 5U1Cyber. We hope to see everybody there. Also gets me back into studio, which I haven't been in for a while. Our next technical training will be on May 6th at 11 a.m. Eastern, exploring the common misconfiguration of Nginx, the damage they could do, and how to avoid them. Next up, see how attackers gain access to endpoints and learn defensive strategies to protect against those attacks. And our May 13th technical training, also at 11 Eastern. Visit securityweekly.com/webcast to register now. If you've missed any of our previously recorded webcasts or technical trainings, they are available for your viewing pleasure at securityweekly.com/on-demand. All right, one of my favorite segments. Adrian, we were talking about this on the break. When I came over to Security Weekly towards the end of 2018, it was October-ish of 2018, I started tracking all the public pure play security vendors. And I took the top 25 and put them into an index. And because I wanted to see how the industry would track to things like the NASDAQ and other parts of the market, but I only wanted the pure plays, right? So like Cisco's not in the index because they're more of a networking company with security. So I went pure plays. And so I've been doing this for a couple of years. And what's interesting is as companies enter and exit, I have to like redo the index, like when a company gets bought like Imperva or Forescout, it impacts. Plus, we have new IPOs constantly coming in. So the index periodically changes, but it hasn't in the last couple rounds, but it will because of the Proofpoint potential acquisition that's going to be coming up.
Well, and there's a couple, right? I missed some good stuff last week, I think, on ESW. I was out because we were putting on B-Sides Knoxville, and one of the only ones that's not on the NASDAQ or the New York Stock Exchange that's public, Sophos, is getting taken private, again, by Thoma Bravo, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, you've got all this movement, and so the index periodically will change. So once a quarter, I kind of update all the metrics for the index. So no changes in the index this quarter, but we know that Proofpoint's going to get taken private in this Thoma Bravo deal as well. Sophos was public and then private, and then I think they're being sold again. We'll talk about a couple other ones that get interesting here in a second. But we've also had a couple companies come out, like KnowBe4 went public last week. So I have replacements, but I try to find companies that are at least have $1 billion in valuation. So when Tufin came out into the public market, they only had a market cap of about 600 million, and I think they're still under that $1 billion threshold. So when I replace one in the index, I try to find one that has $1 billion or higher valuation, and some have way more than that, but that was kind of my criteria initially.
Gotcha.
Okay. Was there a question there? I was going to get into some.
Well, I was going to say, just looking at so I've got this old spreadsheet, saying before we came on that I used to track this stuff when I was back at 451 Research, and I haven't updated it in a couple of years. And I'm pretty sure, just looking at some of the IPOs we've seen, that the share prices, that the pricing on the initial offering has gone way up. Because I'm looking at these, and $16 a share is about standard. It looks for these older ones, and I think we're way above that these days.
It depends. Know before. We'll get into know before here in a second because I have it on the list. But that's still kind of somewhat standard. Anyways,
okay.
let me get to some numbers, right? So I started the index. I baselined the index at 1,000 when I built it a couple of years ago. So at the close of Friday, April 30th, the index closed at 2,177.36. So that's 117, almost 118% gain since its original inception, it's a little down from last quarter. Last quarter was right near the peak, by the way. The peak of the index was February 12th. Yeah, the index closed at an all-time high of 2,371.98 on February 12th. So we're down a little bit since last quarter, but you can tell in the last couple of years, I mean, this index has grown over 100% returns.
How does that track against the NASDAQ over the same period?
Aha, glad you
asked.
That's
my next question.
Yeah, that's on the website.
Yep. Well, the NASDAQ closed at 13,962.68 on the 30th, which is an increase of 110.43% during the same period. So when I created the index, I pulled the NASDAQ. It was like 6,000 something. And I've been tracking them ever since. So right now, the Security Weekly 25 index is outperforming the NASDAQ about 7%.
Okay.
Pretty good.
It is pretty good.
Yeah.
It usually, that's why since we've been doing these, it pretty closely tracks next to NASDAQ.
It does. It is a very similar approximation to the NASDAQ, which you would expect.
You would think. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because
most of them are tech companies. Yeah. But I wanted to break them out separately just to see, there are some nuances at given times, but there is a lot of correlation. When you see the graphs in the show notes, I track both of them. You kind of see them, just they track each other pretty closely. I also go through, Adrian, and I pull all the revenue, all the earnings. I break them down for everybody in the index because I want to see how the companies are performing. So, for example, revenue beat by 3.46% on average. So analysts have an expectation for revenue. Then I track that expected in the actual. The higher by 3.46%. Pretty much in line. It's up a little bit from last quarter. It was a little under 3%, I think. It's earnings that really get me excited because I really want to see how these companies, because when most of these companies come out, they're losing money. Right? They're negative earnings. So how are they doing on earnings beats? So last quarter, they beat by an average of 40.06%, which means the industry is moving into more of a profitability stance, which I think is good for the industry because to come out and continue to lose money quarter after quarter after quarter is not long-term good. But
yeah, I think we called that the end of the dot-com bubble. I think, right?
Yeah, yes, exactly right. And at some point, I'd like to see more of these security companies give out dividends, right? There are very few, if any, that give out dividends in our industry compared to other tech companies. And so in order to give out dividends, you have to have positive earnings.
Right.
And I think, some of these companies, if they decided to give out earnings, could even see a higher a growth in their overall share price because now you have investors that are looking for that dividend percentage in the equation. I also go through and look at the analyst ratings. 1.706 is the average, which is a strong buy based on the buy ratings. It's down a little bit from last quarter. And then I look at the stocks who perform best and worse during the quarter. Now, this is all based on the Q1 results that were for Q4 of 2020. right? So this is based on all last quarter's earning results, which are from the previous quarter. So this is Q4, basically, results. So best rated, for example, is Verint, which is, again, they're one of the highest rated. SailPoint and Tenable, Tenable was on the best rated list last quarter. Worst rated is Secureworks, again. We'll talk about that in a second. Qualys, which is the first time I've ever seen Qualys on this list, by the way. And then Checkpoint again. So Checkpoint and Secureworks have had some struggles from an analyst perspective. Secureworks performance usually suffers a little bit. They are on the worst performers list again.
It's pretty consistent for them.
Yeah, MSSPs are tough. It's a heavy services-based business, and they usually are not darlings in the analyst eyes.
Well, because it's hard to predict revenue too.
And they are, I mean, you can tell if you go to the website today, it looks completely different from a year ago. And they're quickly trying to push towards being more of a product company. You know, they acquired a vulnerability management solution, and I believe they've got an EDR solution as well that they're marketing. They might be marketing it as XDR these days. They might have picked up that buzzword. Right. Let's see.
That they did.
But good performance. Qualys was on the poor performers list. Did you say that, man?
On the ratings list, the analysts really dropped the ratings on Qualys, and I think part of this is because of Philippe's
That's
retirement.
What I was going to guess. Yeah.
And I did notice they did name Sumedh Thakar, the CEO. The board did last week, which you guys will probably cover on ESW on Wednesday. But the board has approved Sumedh Thakar to take over as the permanent CEO for Philippe. That may change the ratings, but the analyst ratings are pretty recent, Paul. So I think the Philippe news had a little, but you know, Qualys is one of the most consistent quarterly producers out there. I mean, they know their revenue is almost to a T every quarter. Their profits are very in line every quarter. You're not going to see them typically on the best or worst performance list because they are consistent. Very steady.
Yeah. Since we've done this, I've noticed that too.
Yeah, very, very steady. Best performers last quarter were CyberArk, Varonis, and SailPoint. SailPoint has done really, really well since they've gone IPO. They've consistently beat expectations. This was the first quarter that Ping actually took a hit because Ping has done pretty well, and they were on the worst performers list. They both Secureworks and Ping missed on earnings. They were both negative earnings, and I think Ping's revenue was very flat, and Secureworks was down a little bit over expectations.
Yeah, could maybe. Okta just completed their acquisition of Auth0, which I'm sure is a hit to Ping. Makes them a lot stronger as a direct competitor there. So that could have something to do with it.
Yeah, could be. I track IPOs. IronNet went public in a SPAC, right? So one of those special public access companies. It's a very interesting. It's almost like a merger that made them become public. It's not a traditional IPO. Palantir was not a traditional IPO either. They just showed up one day on the New York Stock Exchange with a listing. So we've seen some very interesting ways for some of these cybersecurity companies to come into trading on the exchanges versus like a traditional IPO, big launch,
right,
et cetera. Yeah. Planned IPOs for this year. So KnowBe4 did go public on the 22nd. We'll cover it a little more next quarter because officially it's in Q2. But to your point earlier, Adrian, the target price for that was $16 a share. It opened at $19.95 and it closed at $22.98 on Friday, but hit a high of almost $27 during that initial kind of week or 8 days being public. So share price is still kind of in that range, but what you saw was a very interesting uptick of that stock almost immediately. Darktrace is slated to go onto the London Stock Exchange today.
Yeah, so I saw that. That was the London Stock Exchange.
Yep, they're on the London Stock Exchange. They're going on the London. So we covered the story last week, Paul, before you got back. They actually lowered their expectations for the IPO price. So it'll be interesting to see the performance of that IPO hitting London today. Sentinel-1 is talking about potentially going public. There's a $10 billion valuation IPO sitting out there somewhere. Tanium hired the new CFO who's reviewing IPO plans. And then Illumio, who has been on this list for a while, Thoma Bravo's bringing $250 million into that at a $2.9 billion valuation. The question is, will they go public or will something else happen to them? So there's a few others out there that are getting close to IPO. A couple highlights. So I thought this was interesting. McAfee just went public late last year. It was like November, December timeframe. Now they're selling their enterprise business for $4 billion to STG. That's interesting to me. Like they're doing the same thing Symantec did. They're going to go pure play into the consumer space. So Norton LifeLock, they spun out the Symantec to Broadcom, all the enterprise stuff, focusing the Norton LifeLock on consumer. McAfee goes public a few months later. They sell their enterprise business to STG just to focus on the consumer market. Very interesting exits for both of those kind of old school antivirus vendors.
Right.
I mean, it seems like we've seen McAfee as a follower here. When Symantec, would unravel something or acquire something, McAfee was always second to do so. It seemed like. So it seems like they're keeping up that more conservative transition or tradition of saying, well, let's see what happens to Symantec, and we'll follow suit if it makes sense. But I don't know. I definitely not an aggressive approach.
No, and their IPO wasn't that successful, and so maybe that's what also triggered it, is that they didn't get the valuation they were anticipating in that IPO. Decided to make a move like this, sell the enterprise business, double down, focus in consumer. Maybe that helps the stock long term. I don't know. I think it's a little risky gamble to me. I think I'd much rather have the enterprise customers than all the fickle consumers any day, but that's me.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's especially in the kind of business that they do, in the markets that they play in. Those seem like much better long-term bets.
Yeah. We will have 2 cybersecurity IPOs. Like I said, KnowBe4 went on 422 and Darktrace today. I think some of the biggest news is Thoma Bravo taking Proofpoint private in a $12 billion valuation. This is like the second or third public company they've taken private in the time that I've been doing the index. It's just very interesting the way they're buying companies. And it'll be interesting to see what they do with some of these companies in the broader portfolio. But they have a lot of cybersecurity companies in the portfolio right now.
And Sophos in the same breath for $3.9 billion. They're taking private off of the London Stock Exchange.
Yep.
Though I don't think either of those have actually delisted.
Right. And then they've got Barracuda, they've got Logarithm, they just did the merger between Thycotic and Centrify. I mean, lots of moving pieces in that portfolio. Yeah, they spend a lot of money. So then I go to the private side. Now, I used to look at Momentum Cyber used to give me a really, really good quarterly report. And since COVID, their reports have been a little delayed. They're doing a lot of advising and iBanking work these days. And so what I used to be able to get was a really quick snapshot of all the funding through the Momentum Cyber report. So as an alternative, I get to go to one of our shows, Enterprise Security Weekly, where you two cover a lot of this funding. So all of this is a summary of last quarter's Enterprise Security News segment, where we talk about all the funding announcements. There's a lot of activity going on in the funding space. I mean, some big dollars. SNCC at $300 million. Orca at 210, Jump Cloud, who's a sponsor, at 200 million. The list goes on and on and on. I mean, and I stop roughly at about 20 million, and there's got to be 20 companies in this list.
Yeah.
A lot of fun.
Yeah, I mean, the funding hasn't slowed down. Last year, 2020, despite the pandemic, I mean, a lot of those deals were already going, but we didn't really see any blip due to the pandemic at all. If anything, it accelerated some of this stuff. Because of the perceived need for additional security as people are working in new environments, working from home, unsure about whether that's going to go back to normal or change, just drives more security spending, not less. That uncertainty. So it was record year last year in terms of funding. Both number of companies funded and the amounts.
Yeah, I mean, these amounts just in Q1 alone are just staggering. I mean, billions of dollars in funding, just in the list that I pulled that we covered last quarter. And some big acquisitions. I mean, you already mentioned the Auth0 acquisition by Okta. That was $6.5 billion. It's a huge acquisition.
Yep.
Huge. Volterra by F5 was $500 million. Humio by CrowdStrike was $400 million. DocSend by Dropbox was in here at $165. Bridgecrew by Palo Alto was $156 million. We actually have the Prisma Cloud guys coming on to talk a little bit about that Bridgecrew acquisition as part of their ASW segment next week. Scalar by SentinelOne for $155 million. StackRox, which I knew very well from my days at Layered Insight, got acquired by Red Hat for $100 million in the Kubernetes security space. Tenable bought Elcid for $98 million, and then Rapid7 bought Elseed for $50 million. Want to talk about confusion there? Elcid versus Elseed. Elseed more on the AppSec container cloud workload protection. Elcid, I think, is more of a Active Directory play.
Interesting.
Yeah, and you mentioned, I noticed, and I haven't worked all the way through it, but Crunchbase actually came out with a good funding report this year. Talking about Momentum Cyber not having that, so that might be something for folks to check out. It came out, I want to say, maybe a week or two ago.
Yeah, it's interesting because there's an ecosystem here that we covered, right? Like companies get funded. Companies get bought. Companies' stock prices are going up, so they buy companies. And then new companies come on the market, and they get finished. It's an entire ecosystem. So, looking at it from that holistic point of view, I think is kind of cool.
Yeah, and that's why I like this segment so much, because it forces me to think about all the pieces in the market. Right?
Yeah.
We've got all the IPOs and the funding. You've got the acquisitions and how all these pieces are playing together. And we, like I said, you guys cover this on Enterprise Security Weekly pretty much every week.
Yeah,
there's an announcement.
As we're going.
Right, as you're going. But when you sit back and you kind of pull it all together, you realize how much activity is actually going on a quarterly basis. There's a lot of money changing hands.
Yes.
Quarter to quarter to quarter.
They actually have some numbers here from the Crunchbase report. 2021 so far, $3.7 billion of funding. And for all of 2020 was $7.8 billion. So we're already just about halfway there in the first quarter.
Wow.
Halfway of last year, which last year was a record.
Lovely. Yeah, we're going to keep seeing money flowing. I do point out a couple hot startups because we are in an interesting position. We see a lot of different companies come in and then they come onto the network. A couple of the ones from last quarter that I thought, Pixum. We've covered Pixum on this show and Enterprise Security Weekly. Their plugin, their browser plugin to look for malicious websites, I think is a really interesting technology. The other one's Material Security, both kind of on the phishing play, Paul, where Material Security is actually doing some very interesting stuff they're in the inbox, right? In the mailbox.
Yes. Material Security is the one that protects the inbox.
Yeah. Where Pixum protects it more at the browser. When you click the link, it inspects the page to look for malicious activity. And when you think about that,
yeah, it's funny you say that, Matt, because they're both sponsors, and I just did calls with each of them, not that too far apart, and I'm like, I would have both of these. I mean,
absolutely.
Granted, they're sponsors, right? But I would have put my CISO hat on. I would have both to do something different and new when it comes to protecting email and phishing and not fall into, I think, a lot of those old traps that I don't think move the needle enough.
The very definition of defense in depth there, one that, tries to prevent it in the email, and the other one is going to hopefully catch it if it manages to get open in the browser, which, more and more, we are seeing those attacks come outside of the inbox now, so like anything that does messaging, everything from Signal to WhatsApp, LinkedIn, people are getting nasty links.
Yes. And and they're not in your inbox, which means the traditional inbox solutions don't work. But if you're going to a browser, then you have the browser plugin that can catch it there. It's kind of that 1-2 punch. It provides a very interesting combination.
In Slack now that we have Slack Connect, now that there's the ability to from somebody outside your organization to connect in depending on what your settings are. So that's been some new configuration guidance is if you don't explicitly want to allow people from outside your organization to throw stuff into your Slack, you need to switch this off. I think it's off by default.
I don't know. I have to go look. See, Adrian, I told you it would be an easy segment. You've covered most of these stories already. So thanks for filling in today. Thank you, Paul, as always, for joining us. And we'll see everyone next week on Business Security Weekly.